people inquire about the MDV, and I've learned over time to qualify the people that should buy the Dagger and the people that should buy the MDV.
Right.
And it's a really good thing that works well. And I ask them, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to train? Because the MDV is a knife that you need to have some familiarization training on.
Is the MDV the Skallywag problem child?
Oh boy.
You can answer that directly because we've already answered it. But
We have answered it. It is. It any knife that has very, very specific aspects to it, especially when we're working with subject matter experts that very clearly understand a knife. Again, the thing with the Tanto, I can develop a Tanto, put it on the website, and I can name it a Tanto, and I don't have to say anything more about it. It's 5 inches long. It's a Tanto. It's made from this steel. I can't do that with this knife. So I wouldn't say it's the problem child. I would say we spend a tremendous amount of time in customer service on this knife, educating people on why it is. And of course, some people are willing to be taught, and then some people, we all know this. I mean, there's in any industry these days, there are a certain amount of, sidewalk commandos, basement dwellers, whatever we want to call them.
Everybody's an expert.
There's a lot of experts that just will beat the design up. When in fact, this knife was designed for a guy that's probably taught more people how to do bad things to bad people with a tool or an open hand than most anybody in the world, right? I mean, literally, or certainly on par with many. So yes, it's. Let's don't say it's the problem child. Let's say it's customer service intensive.
Okay.
That's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah, I see a difference when a military fill in the blank type A type person sees this weapon, this tool. They'll put it in their hand, and it appears that they understand, like a natural type of a thing. But the same tool, when I would hand this to a civilian, it's almost like, why isn't there a handle on it? Or why isn't there?
Why did you put scales on it? Or
there's something about
this
it
is uncomfortable, or this is going to hurt my hand. And
well, I mean, it falls under most people. Well, I mean, the thing is, like, the things that you don't understand, you're most fearful of, but at the same time, the things that you don't understand, you probably have a negative viewpoint towards. The thing is that this tool is something that you can walk in with other skill sets and still adapt to it. But if you have absolutely no background in it, you're going to be confused as to why the features are there. And so it is a tool that you need education on, prior to use. And so you can classify that as anything that falls under that requirement, such as a vehicle.
That's a very good point. A lot of people call. It's ironic that sometimes they start as emails, but mostly these are phone calls that we get on the toll-free line. Is people inquire about the MDV, and I've learned over time to qualify the people that should buy the Dagger and the people that should buy the MDV.
Right.
And it's a really good thing that works well. And I ask them, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to train? Because the MDV is a knife that you need to have some familiarization training on. Whereas, let's say it's like for instance, I spoke to a very nice lady the other day, probably in her 40s. And she wanted a knife to defend herself, and somebody had recommended the MDV. And I said, "Do you have any martial arts background? Are you training? Are you working with anybody?" And she goes, "No, I'd be willing to, but I haven't yet." And I'm like, "Buy the Dagger, because I don't need to teach you a whole lot to deploy that knife and poke holes in somebody to get them away from you. That knife is a get off me knife." Whereas any kind of a cut, and the unfortunate problem is Hollywood has ruined this for us, is most people have in their mind that they're going to cut and they're going to do this big sweeping cut. And you might cut the heck out of somebody, but as Mike has discussed 100 times, you're not going to take them out of the fight. They're still going to be after you. They may be bleeding.
Most times they don't even know they're cut.
They don't even know. I mean, I use this many, many times, literally multiple times a week, of like, everybody's cut themselves and you look down and you're like, oh shit, I'm bleeding. How did I do that? But you've never stepped on a tack or stuck a staple in one of the end of your fingers accidentally and went, oh, I didn't notice that. No, you went, fucker, that hurt, right? Because puncture wounds hurt. They spread tissue, they tear tissue. I mean, you can deeply speak on that from your medical background, but a cut will cut nerves and all kinds of things and maybe not, bypass that pain factor. Whereas a puncture wound is going to get your attention really quickly. And so for people that don't really want to get into the training side of the knife, I always recommend the dagger because that's really simple. Take it out, poke a hole. This you need to have some understanding of where are you going to stick it and what are you going to do with it and how are you going to cut effectively. Are you just going to poke holes with it, which is fine too.
And that's the entire purpose of this virtual training course is to
So you understand what to do.
remedy that issue, because there are so many people that are like, I have a background in knife fighting, but I want to know exactly how Mike wanted us to use it at some point, or I want some actual training, and it's impossible for me to run enough courses to actually do that. And that price point is a lot higher than what this virtual training course would be.
We charge $600 for a 2-day course, and we've
yes.
done multiple courses,
Right.
and we'll continue to do live courses. But
Yeah, and this will be more content than I could put in a weekend.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that we are also, that the dagger doesn't also have its preferred ways and methods of use. And so that's something else that I am filming, so that we have it's going to be a much smaller course, but basically how do you actually carry that? How do you actually draw that properly? Because so many people draw it inefficiently. And then, what are some actual methods of use that even those that are skilled would go, oh, okay, that actually makes sense. That I'm not using it just as a stabby thing. So that is coming real soon as well. So, just to throw that all that out there.
Great. All right, here's where the questions switch and are directed straight at Mr. Donvito here.
Oh, great.
All right, Michael, what does MDV Plus One mean?
All right, so we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to name it KITE, an acronym for Knife in the Eye. And I thought it was a great name, and Craig thought it was a bad name. And so we would go back and forth, and he said that he wanted my name on it. And I was like, that's horrible. I don't know.
No.
So, if I didn't give him a better name, then he was going to put Michael Donvito on it, and I was like, that is just garbage. And so I told him that, hey, why don't we just do a signature? Like my email signature is MDV. After the initial email to someone. So I believe that would be appropriate. And because sometimes I run jokes in my head and I'm like, I think that's funny. The plus one was because at the time I was invited to a wedding, and what happened was you get those cards and it's like, hey, do you have a plus one? And it's like, well, it is supposed to be my personal carry knife, so that means that I will always have it, and so it is my plus one. I will always have that as my plus one. And so just as a joke, I was like, we'll just call it the MDV Plus One, and that is where that name came from. It had nothing to do with plus something else. It was just
I didn't get my trainer. That was the plus one.
Yeah, it's just something where I was like, I had a name, and then I couldn't come up with a better name, and so I was looking at that, and I was like, "Well, there you go. That's where the name
That's
is."
funny. That'll confuse Craig's customers.
Yes, that's exactly why.
That'll drive him nuts. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So we called it that. But yeah, it doesn't mean a sheath, right?
No.
Doesn't mean another knife, or it doesn't mean
No,
your plus one.
It is.
It's your date.
That's right. It's the knife that you should.
It's when
have
you're
on you
dateless.
all the time. Yeah.
You can have. This is your date. This will be my date for the evening.
So there's a question about the cutting edge. Isn't the cutting edge too small to be effective?
Yeah, so that's a question that constantly comes up. People ask about the length of that. Is it long enough to actually cause damage in a number of different scenarios? And the answer is that is based off the user. Okay, so as Jack says, and we have one of these mindset videos where we talk about the length of knives. There is a lot of trauma, and there are many scenarios. 9/11 was one of them, where box cutters were used to not only intimidate but to kill individuals. And so, obviously, the something being so small is not the thing that is going to determine whether or not it's an effective tool. It is the intent of the user, and therefore also the ability of that tool being brought to bear. And so when you ambush somebody, say with a box cutter, and they don't know that there's a box cutter in the fight because they're on a airplane or whatever it is, it's real easy to get to areas that cause massive trauma. So the same thing with a smaller knife. The use of this is not an old school Bowie knife like duel where someone brings out a crocodile Dundee freaking knife and then you pull this thing out. Okay, in that scenario, I would want a similarly sized blade, and it would be most appropriate to carry something in that fashion. Obviously, the larger the blade is, the more effective it's going to be in a duel or a fight. But the thing is that for something that you're going to carry for your personal protection that you don't want poking out of your clothes and imprinting, and law enforcement being called on you because you're carrying this freaking sword around, we had to design it to be smaller. Now, I have seen metal bic or metal pens, business pens. Stabbed into the temple of individuals as far as cadavers. So my father used to do all of the um, those little slides that are about this big, and you put them in. You do all the studies on them, and so I have a whole bag of them in the closet over there. And one of them has a cadaver where the metal pen was stuck into the temple. And the story is that there was a conversation with a table smaller than this, and the business deal goes bad, and the guy just grabs it and a hammer grip and just like stabs the guy in the temple, and the dude dies right there. And it's like, so if you could stick a metal pen into somebody's temple and kill them, then I guarantee you that if you stuck that in their temple, it would probably do more damage. So it's one of those things that goes back to the training. The fact of the matter is that if you give any weapon to someone who is trained and efficient in violence, it is going to enhance their skills and capabilities. If you give someone who has no training or has no ability to um, cross that line mentally so that they're fully committed, then no weapon is going to be a good weapon for them. Okay, and so it's that whole a warrior that is unarmed is going to be infinitely more dangerous than the coward who is armed to the teeth. And so that's what I would say for the length of the blade.